Let's look at some of the ways congestion actually can be reduced and what it means in terms of emissions and so on. Obviously, one can build bigger roads and increase the number of lanes, but this is not always a good thing. This tends to actually invite more drivers once they know that the roads have been made bigger. Ride sharing is obviously a good option, and these so-called media assisted ride hailing is like Uber, Lyft, and Ola, and so on, have become big part of life, but it's unclear whether they actually reduce traffic or increase them, especially in places like Washington D.C., where the connectivity with metro is not that great, or even in New York City, etc. Public transportation, obviously. Mixed use neighborhoods. We talked about how carbon tax on oil, gasoline, energy can eventually lead to developers building things differently. Mixed use neighborhoods is basically workplaces, restaurants, schools, and residences being arranged in such a way that commuter miles are reduced. Bike paths help a lot. Walkways also help. Implement urban design and land use planning that lead to less vehicle miles traveled, including mixed residential and non-residential land uses within a neighborhood, increasing housing and industrial density, allowing for innovative planning and zoning, of course, implementing some type of growth management. Obviously, COVID lockdowns and work from home and generally nervousness about living in urban centers where there were some hotspots of COVID numbers is going to change behavior and is going to add lots of uncertainty to everything, including how transportation and vehicle miles are going to evolve in the coming years. God knows how long that'll last, right? So contributors of GHG emissions in the US in 2017, the latest data that was reported here in the book itself. Energy production, electricity, industry, agriculture is a significant contributor, commercial and residential use, and here it is transportation, the largest contributor to emissions in 2017. This is pretty much true across the world as well, except in places where people just don't have cars, like India right now has a very low number of personal vehicles. Okay, the global greenhouse gases going outside the US for 2016, energy sector is basically 3/4 of the emissions, and agriculture, forestry, and land use has more than 18%. Waste like landfills and wastewater, and industry. And within the energy, there is use in the industry of 25%. Transportation uses energy in various forms, including road, aviation, shipping, and so on, and energy use in buildings. So transportation remains a significant proportion of overall emissions everywhere around the world. Air pollution emissions have some good news in terms of the evolution of vehicles, fuel efficiency, reducing tailpipe emissions, and so on. So here it is percentage change compared to 1970. GDP has grown in the US. Okay, this is from EPA. Vehicle miles traveled have increased almost 190% compared to 1970. So obviously not much public transportation happened, and the monoculture of driving cars has evolved. Population has grown 59%, pretty significant. Energy consumption has increased 44%, so maybe it's some good news that despite the vehicle miles traveled and GDP growth and population growth, energy consumption growth remains below 50%. CO2 emissions show a little bit of a dip since about 2005, but overall emissions for the globe continue to go up. This depends on the combination of fuels, like more use of natural gas is going to reduce some of the CO2 emissions because it's got higher energy density and lower emissions compared to gasoline, for example, definitely compared to coal. Coal power plants are going out of commission as well in the US. At some level, but US continues to transport coal to other countries. Aggregate emissions, the six common pollutants we talked about, methane, carbon monoxide, hydrocarbons, nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, and so on, have shown a significant drop of minus 73%. So the air quality standards imposed, as well as vehicle requirements like CAFE standards, have had the impact expected. But if you look at California in terms of tailpipe hydrocarbon performance standards for new light-duty vehicles from 1966, there is a tremendous drop in terms of grams per mile driven of hydrocarbon in the tailpipe emission. So that's good news, but the population grows, number of vehicles continues to grow, then this is still something that has to be watched out for. So if you look at the percentage of trips versus CO2 emission, there is some lesson to be learned here in terms of the distribution. So vehicle activity and emissions here show a tailed distribution with a very long tail here in terms of CO2 emissions as a percent of trips. So that depends on, this is in grams per mile. For a representative database of passenger vehicle trips in Southern California. Okay, so maximum emissions are somewhere around here in the percentage of trips. So this is useful in terms of planning for ways to reduce commute, right? It's not just the percentage of trips, but it is the emission that has tails, and the far end of the tail has to be controlled, and one can use that kind of data to figure out where the levers are in terms of reducing CO2 emissions effectively. And we'll see some more data and some more behaviors or distributions of emissions to see what kind of lessons can be learned from having such data on commuter miles and tailpipe emissions of either criteria pollutants or hydrocarbon or just CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions.